can it run Crysis?
But can it run Crysis?
That question turned into a meme so quickly, it basically swallowed the franchise whole. And yeah, the whole Crysis series is a technical showcase. It pushed PCs to the limit and made your graphics card cry for mercy. But that reputation came with a cost. Somewhere between the benchmarking and the punchlines, people stopped paying attention to the actual games. And that's a shame, because Crysis wasn't just pretty, it was smart. It was experimental, and across all three entries, it quietly pushed the boundaries of what a first-person shooter could be. But once a game gets labeled as a tech demo, it's hard to shake. The visuals became the headline and everything else got buried underneath. So now, let's dig it back up. So here's the part that gets overlooked. The original Crysis wasn't just a pretty game, it was a genuinely good one. Released in 2007, it dropped players into a massive open-ended island and gave them a nanosuit that basically turned them into a sci-fi predator. You could boost your speed, go invisible, tank bullets, or throw a North Korean soldier through a palm tree. And all of that was baked into a level design philosophy that actually encouraged creativity. This wasn't just another corridor shooter with high-res walls. The levels were wide, reactive, and rewarded experimentation. You want to sneak through the jungle, picking people off with stealth? Go for it. Prefer to hijack a jeep and crash it straight through the front gate? That's also an option. And the game didn't punish you for flipping between those two approaches. It let you adapt on the fly, something that most modern shooters still struggle with. This nanosuit wasn't just a gimmick either, it was a mechanic that tied the whole thing together. Every encounter became a puzzle. What combination of powers and tactics could get you through? Do you vanish into the trees or go full Hulk and start throwing explosive barrels? The enemy's AI wasn't perfect, but it was reactive, and the game gave you the tools to respond in kind. It felt like a sandbox with real tension, where your powers didn't come from bullet sponging but from thinking a little faster than the people shooting at you. Now the second half of the game does shift gears. Aliens show up and the level design narrows. Things get a bit more conventional, and that's not bad, it's just different. Less Predator and more Half-Life 2 with Frostbite. Some people did like it, others felt it broke the flow, but either way the ambition is clear. Crysis wanted to do more than just run well on expensive hardware. It wanted to build a shooter that let you play like a superhuman without babysitting you. And yet, none of that is what people talked about. You can go back and look at any of the reviews or forum threads from 2007, and the gameplay barely registers. It's all about graphic settings, FPS benchmarks, and how it tanked your brand new PC. The people who could run it, they treated it like a flex. The people who couldn't, dismissed it as unoptimized trash or something to work toward. So the game got trapped into this weird limbo, too demanding for casual players, too misunderstood by critics, and completely overshadowed by its own visual reputation, which is unfortunate because under all the bloom and the anti-aliasing, this was one of the most forward-thinking shooters of its time. Now a quick aside, because I'd be doing this series a disservice if I didn't mention Crysis Warhead. If you haven't played it, don't worry, most people haven't. It was released in 2008 as a sort of standalone side story. Same engine, same island, different perspective. Instead of playing as Nomad, you're in the boots of Psycho, the guy who spent most of Crysis 1 yelling into your headset like a caffeinated drill sergeant. Now, Warhead is interesting for a couple reasons. First, it was more optimized. A lot more people could actually run it. Second, it doubled down on the fun parts of Crysis 1. More explosions, more action, tighter pacing. It trimmed the fat without losing the core appeal. And Psycho, well, he was weirdly compelling. He's not subtle, but he's entertaining. The story has a bit more personality, I guess. It moves faster, the gunplay feels punchier, and the whole thing is like Crytek saying, alright, we've heard you, here's Crysis, but leaner, louder, and less frozen alien cave. But, just like the whole franchise, it's pretty tragic what happened to it, because nobody really talked about it. It slipped under the radar almost instantly, maybe because it didn't come with a new graphics card attached, maybe because it was a side entry, or maybe, and here's the irony, because it worked too well. It didn't melt PCs, so the benchmarking crowd moved on, and the people who actually wanted a great shooter, most of them didn't even know it existed, and probably most of them weren't even looking at Crysis for a good shooter experience. They just wanted a benchmark. Still, Warhead is worth remembering, if only because it proves that Crytek wasn't just throwing pixels at the wall. They were actually listening. They understood the gameplay that they had for their series was a real strength. They just couldn't get people to stop talking about the lighting effects long enough to notice. Then came Crysis II, the game that was supposed to bring the franchise to the masses. Released in 2011, it was Crytek's big console debut, And right out the gate, people were skeptical. The PC elites thought it was a betrayal. Console players weren't sure what to make of it. And critics, they called it streamlined, which is reviewer code for "we think you dumbed it down." And yeah, some stuff was simplified. The levels were more linear and the nanosuit powers were condensed into armor and stealth modes. And the vibe shifted hard from tropical sandbox to scripted urban warzone. But the idea that it was dumbed down, I don't really think that's fair. What Crysis II actually did was take the sandbox DNA of the first game and dropped it into a vertical cityscape. You were still sneaking around, you were still ambushing enemies, you were still flipping between powers on the fly. You just happened to be doing it across collapsing skyscrapers and flooded subway tunnels instead of palm trees. And in some ways, it made the game tighter. You weren't lost in a jungle anymore, you had context, structure. You could still approach fights in multiple ways, but now the set pieces were dialed in. It was less Far Cry, more Deus Ex meets Michael Bay. Narratively, it also started building something a little more ambitious. Crysis II recenters around the Prophet, the original team leader, and leans into heavier themes like identity, memory, and what happens when a machine starts thinking like a man. It's not Oscar material, but it's not phoned in either. There's an actual effort to give the nanosuit and the guy wearing it some depth. But again, none of that landed the way it should have. Most of the backlash boiled down to this: it wasn't Crysis I. People wanted another open island and got a half-destroyed Manhattan instead, so they assumed Crytek sold out, and ignored the fact that the game was still doing things most shooters weren't even attempting. It's a perfect example of the franchise curse. If it looked good, people assumed it had nothing else going on. If it tried something new, people just wanted the old thing back. Either way, it couldn't win. So, Crysis III. This was Crytek's big closer, and you can tell they were trying to make everyone happy. People missed the jungle? Fine. Here's New York City, but wrapped in vines and swallowed by nature. People missed the open-ended gameplay? Well, here you go. Here's wider levels, sandbox arenas, stealth grass, verticality, and more tactical options than ever. You wanted a cool weapon? Here's a bow, a sci-fi compound bow that lets you one-shot enemies in total silence and never break stealth. It's the most video game thing ever made, and I mean that in the best way possible. Mechanically, this was the strongest the nanosuit had ever felt. You had more flexibility, smoother transitions between powers, and a progression system that let you tweak your playstyle. You could play like a ghost or go full War Machine, and for once the game didn't force you down one path. It let you actually play the way you wanted. And the Prophet? He finally became a character, not just a voice in someone else's ear, or a silent protagonist in a cutscene. By Crysis III, he's a man who basically became the suit. That's what the story leans into, the whole what's left of me angle. It's not subtle and it's not particularly great either, but hey, they're trying. The Ceph got a proper payoff, the plot ties up, and it actually feels like a trilogy ending, which is rare in shooters, especially ones that were never really known for their writing. There's closure here, not just visually, but narratively. They try to wrap it all up with meaning, not just explosions. And so of course, it barely made a dent. Because once again, people were more interested in frame rates than gameplay. You look at the launch coverage and most of it reads like a GPU spec sheet. Articles about anti-aliasing, shader performance, tessellation. Barely anyone was talking about how the game was actually played. Crysis III was a good game, arguably a great one, but the conversation never moved beyond, can it run this? And by this point, you could feel Crytek losing steam. They had thrown everything they had into this trilogy. Every new entry responded to feedback. Every game refined the idea, and it still wasn't enough. By the end of Crysis III, it was pretty clear that the series had peaked. Not because it ran out of ideas, but because nobody really cared anymore. Crytek had spent 6 years building a franchise around experimentation, around freedom, around actually making you feel like a super soldier. And all anyone ever wanted to talk about was lighting engines and ultra settings. The graphics first identity became a trap. Every time Crytek tried to improve the gameplay or tell a more coherent story, the conversation snapped back to GPU benchmarks. It was like they couldn't escape their own shadow. Now, to be fair, Crytek's problems weren't just about perception. There were publisher demands, rising development costs, some questionable internal decisions, and a few projects, Rise comes to mind, that didn't exactly pay off. But when your legacy gets boiled down into a meme, more or less, it makes it a lot harder to convince anyone you had more to offer. And once it was clear that the audience didn't want more Crysis unless it melted hardware, Crytek pivoted. They started licensing their engine, chased other projects, got hit with layoffs. For a while, it looked like the company might not even make it out of the 2010s intact. And Crysis, it went dormant. No sequel, no spiritual successor, just a remaster years later, mostly marketed with, you guessed it, better graphics. Even in the remaster cycle, the gameplay barely came up. No one asked if it held up mechanically. They asked if it supported ray tracing, and that kind of says it all. The tragedy of Crysis isn't that it wasn't good, it's that it was good in ways no one was paying attention to. And by the time people looked back, the series had already been reduced to a tech demo footnote. This was a franchise that took real risks, that refused to settle for being just another shooter, that offered actual player choice in a genre obsessed with handholding, and still got written off as style over substance. Not because that's what it was, but because that's what people expected to see. The Crysis trilogy was never about graphics. It just happened to look so good that no one actually noticed what else it was doing. If you're interested in more videos about shooter sandboxes, you might want to check out my video here about BioShock and why that faded into obscurity as well.